Hey, folks, welcome back to LettermenRow.com. This is Talking Stuff, the Ohio State recruiting podcast brought to you by us and our good friends at Byers Automotive. I am Jeremy Birmingham. That is Spencer Holbrook. We are talking stuff about the Buckeyes and the 2022 recruiting class. Today, Spencer, is a little bit of a specific show. We're talking secondary, and that's it. Nothing else but the secondary. The secondary today, Spencer, is primary.
It's primary. I knew you were going to say that. I knew it.
Yeah, well,
there was a lot to learn, though, over this past weekend. A lot of new developments in the secondary recruiting. You were on the road searching out some answers for some of those questions, and then some of them became public on Twitter that kind of shook up the entire Ohio State big board, I would say. So I think there's a lot to get to, and I think it's a good place to start.
Yeah, so for me, as you alluded to, I was in Arizona over the weekend to see the Battle.com 7-on-7 tournament out there. Really just an opportunity to go and see some kids we haven't had a chance to really see in person. And it worked out pretty well that Keon Grace, who we have had on Bermanology and talked about pretty frequently on the shows, was actually hosting Xavier Nwampa from Iowa at his house and letting him crash there for the weekend. Xavier flew out to play in the 7-on-7 tournament with Keon and the Tucson Turf team that's out there. They won the tournament. That's all well and good. I think that Xavier was the best player on the field over the weekend. I was actually a little bit surprised at how big he was. I mean, he, as a kid who's 6'2", I think he's listed at 6'2", 190. He looked a little bit like a guy who could play linebacker in some systems, or maybe move down and play that that combination role that a lot of teams are using, that Viper hybrid type, or at Ohio State, the bullet, that's not really a real thing. But he's a guy that moved really well. He didn't have any interceptions or anything in the times that I was watching their games, but he made a lot of plays. He broke up 6 or 7 different passes. One of the coaches on the other teams were telling the quarterback, stop throwing in his direction, stop throwing in the direction of 17, which is a pretty good indicator that he was taking up a good portion of the field. With Xavier, I thought that was what I noticed, Spencer, was that he was very instinctive. He didn't look to me to be like the most fluid athlete out there, but he seemed to know where the ball was going a lot of times, and it put him in the right spot. Very aggressive, came up to the line of scrimmage. Once he made a decision, he was, quick to the ball. And on the field, there's a whole heck of a lot to like about Xavier Nwampa. Off the field, getting to talk to him a little bit more and getting to know him a little bit better, you can see why Ohio State likes him. The kid is very polite. He is very intelligent. He is a kid that is really going through this process and checking off all the boxes.
Yeah, you know him better than I do, and you were able to see him in person. I don't know. It kind of it's hard to find a comp for him, really. I think he's a kind of unique in the way he plays, but I think we're going to run into that more and more in the secondary, because I think they're recruiting a little positionless. I know Kerry Combs still loves his prototypical big corners that can play press man to man. You know exactly what Kerry Combs wants in a corner, but when it comes to safety, it's more these unique guys who we really haven't seen their style of play before. I think about a guy like Court Williams, who we don't really know how to classify what he is. Is he a linebacker, a hybrid, a safety? And then you look at, now we're looking at Xavier Nwampa, and it's like, is he a safety? Is he a hybrid? Will he end up playing linebacker? You just don't know. But I think that's a good thing for Ohio State. And so I just think that the diversity of recruiting that they're doing right now in the secondary and the linebacker spot, and mix that all together, I think it's good for the program.
Yeah, I also got a chance to catch up for the first time with Zion Branch from Bishop Gorman High School out in Las Vegas. He was down in Phoenix with the Game Changers program that features a lot of Bishop Gorman products. Kind of different in a way from Nwampa, and you can see why the Buckeyes want them both. They're complementary players. They're not two of the same type. You can really see with Zion, what I saw out of him was a kid that sort of looked like Josh Proctor, and then getting to talk to him and watching the way he played, it reminded me a little bit of Jordan Fuller. A very read and react. He would dissect the play and then make a decision quickly. He was not necessarily, and I don't know if I'm going to say this in the right way. Maybe it'll come across a little confusing, but I didn't think he was as instinctive as Xavier Nwampa was, but I thought that he was more decisive when he recognized what was going on the play. He was there in a fraction and moved extremely well. That was the main difference between him and Wampa in my mind, is that Zion Branch was a much more fluid athlete, like a kid that really you could tell could really get going quickly if he decided to do so. And he was wearing an Ohio State sweatshirt on the second day of the tournament. Maybe that was just a coincidence because he knew that we were going to be chatting. I don't know. You can read into that what you will. It's not like he couldn't have brought in any other brought in. He's already been brought in. He's already brought. He could have brought 15 other team sweatshirts and on his 2-day trip, and he brought an Ohio State one. So I think that that's a positive if you're looking for a reason to read into things. What?
And those guys always know that media is going to be there. Like, it's not like he's like, oh, I don't want to wear any school because I know they know that stuff happens. I don't think it means anything. I'm sure it doesn't mean.
No,
anything.
it doesn't mean anything in the big.
It's
picture.
Always funny, right?
It doesn't mean anything in the big picture. But I'll say that I feel like maybe it's a tiny bit different in this situation. He was in Phoenix, a 3-hour trip from Las Vegas where he lives. It's not like he was in the Midwest and going to a place where he knew there would be a bunch of Ohio State affiliated media there or anything like that, where you kind of play up to the crowd. I mean, again, he only packed for a 2-day trip. He packed one of his sweatshirts was an Ohio State one. Maybe that means something, probably means nothing, but at least anecdotally, it means that the Buckeyes are on his mind, and getting a chance to talk to him. It was pretty obvious to tell why he really likes the relationship he has with Matt Barnes and Kerry Combs. And made it a point to tell me that Ryan Day's involvement in his recruitment has been a difference maker for Ohio State, in that he knows that he's a priority for the head coach. And that, for these kids that are seeing the business of football and assistant coaches coming and going, it is very important for Ohio State that Ryan Day remains not just a close, like Urban Meyer, Spencer, in the recruiting game was the closer. You'd have one or two guys every year that Urban would be involved with throughout their recruitment, but he really didn't get into the game with each prospect until it was time to wrap it up. Ryan Day has taken a completely different approach, and anyone that Ohio State has on their must-get board, or the guys that are absolute 100% no doubt takes, Ryan Day's already involved with them, and I think that makes a big difference. And Zion Branch told me that.
Yeah, if the plane was starting, you knew Urban Meyer was about to go close something. But Ryan Day seems to take, like you said, a completely different approach. He talks to these guys. It seems like every recruit has something to say about Coach Day, and you didn't see that as often with Urban Meyer. You didn't see that as often in the past, and I think that's a big strategy that I think is causing the Buckeyes to take a step forward in recruiting after Urban Meyer. I think it's safe to say right now that Ohio State has taken a step forward in recruiting. When you look at the 2021 class, as impressive as it is, the 2022 class, as impressive as it's shaping up to be, it looks like they are taking that next step to becoming even more like Alabama, and I guess more like Clemson. But Clemson in recruiting doesn't do quite that Alabama and Ohio State do. So I just think that is an interesting little anecdote that Ryan Day is pushing the envelope a little more than Urban Meyer used to earlier in the process.
Yeah, Urban Meyer's reputation would open a lot of doors for Ohio State, and people, when recruits, especially early on in the process, would talk about him, it would be about how, oh, Urban Meyer's the coach. He's won 3 national championships. I know all about Urban Meyer. And then it's like, but I don't really have a relationship with him. And with Ryan Day, it's kind of the opposite. And I think that that's playing well for Ohio State on the trail. And with both Xavier Nwampa and Zion Branch, in talking to them over the weekend, I did not get any sense that they were in a hurry to make a decision. I will say with Xavier Nwampa, if he was making a decision today and forced to make a decision today, I feel pretty confident it would be Ohio State. On the flip side of that, if Zion Branch had to make a decision today, I think it'd probably be USC because it's the only school he's been to. And there is a story on the website on lettermenrow.com on Tuesday morning, a little bit more in-depth interview with Zion. And you can definitely feel that from him. This is a kid that understands that this process is being somewhat affected by the dead period and the inability to visit. And while every school in the country is dealing with that and being forced to handle it, it's impossible to not say that, hey, this is hurting Ohio State in these couple recruitments more so than in others, because this is a kid who lives 2,000 miles away. and needs to be able to see what campus is like. It's not the same as a kid who's in Virginia, and I'll use Travion Henderson as an example. That the weather's pretty much the same. You kind of know what you're getting. In between Columbus and Virginia, things are somewhat similar. Life is a whole heck of a lot different in Las Vegas than it is in Columbus, Ohio. And for a kid like Zion and his family, it's important for them to get out and visit.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. And I do have a question for you about this entire visit that you went on to Arizona.
Sure.
So we've heard about a lot about all of these guys. Do all three of them, and this might be a dumb question, look the part? Like, do they all look what they look like? Does he look like the 53rd best player in the country? Does Keon Grays look like a kid who's going to rise to a top 150 prospect like we think he probably will? Like, do these all fit the billing?
Yeah, I mean, Keon, from a physical standpoint, I'll touch on that first because this is all DB all the time, and we're going to deviate to wide receiver here for a quick sec. Keon is a kid who needs to put on weight. He's 6'1" and 170 pounds. I mean, he's a very typical high school junior skill position player. He's not ripped. He's extremely quick and fluid and a really silky smooth route runner. I don't see anything from what I saw over the weekend that would make me question Ohio State's choice if they decide to take him in their class of 2022, which we'll talk more about in the next couple of weeks, I'm sure, after he makes his visit to Ohio State this coming weekend. But no doubter with Xavier and Zion, those are two kids that are at the very top of the Ohio State wish list on the recruiting class of 2022, not just in the defensive backfield, but in the overall class picture. And it's because of their combination of size, skill, and their personality sets, which are perfect fits for Ohio State. We'll stay in Arizona and talk about Jair Brown, who was out there playing with the Louisiana Bootleggers again. That team is loaded. I mean, it might be the most talented team, most like name recognizable team of anyone out there in the 7-on-7 circuit. Tons of kids committed to LSU, kids committed to, going to Texas and 5-star recruits all over the field. And Jair sometimes gets a little bit overshadowed in that group. He is definitely a kid that the Buckeyes see as a 2 or 3 years down the road making an impact. I don't think that anyone's going to confuse him for a step on campus and play right away guy like maybe Jaheim Singletary could be. But I saw a lot to like out of Jair. He's extremely quick with his feet. He is a bit of a risk taker at corner, which I don't think Kerry Combs will love. He's a kid that likes to kind of go for the big play when sometimes all you need to do is make the smart play. But in talking to him, he was very happy to be out there and getting to know Keon Grays and getting to know Xavier Nwampa and talking to Zion Branch. And, one thing that Jair told me over the weekend was that he hasn't really taken on a role as a recruiter for Ohio State yet. And he said over the weekend, I guess I need to start recruiting me some safeties. So he's at least seeing those guys and making the decisions to start operating on behalf of the Buckeyes, which is important because there has been a lot of questions about Jair Brown and his, long-term viability as a commitment for Ohio State, if he's going to stick. I don't know if he's going to or not. I'm not going to, blow smoke up people's butts, Spencer, but it seems like a kid that understands that he has options and he's interested in seeing them, but he also knows that Ohio State is something special, and he got an offer very early, committed very early, and you don't get that offer that early from Ohio State unless they really think you can play.
Yeah, and I think that's important. Ohio State needs some of those recruiters on the defensive side of the ball. Simply put, I don't think CJ Hicks can do it all on his own. And I think Deshaun McCullough's done a great job of that. I think if they can get Jair Brown to really start recruiting, you would have a guy and Gabe Powers. You've got guys in the front seven. You've got guys in the back four that can really recruit and not just be the position coaches, but recruiting, but also the players recruiting. I think that's important because these visits, when they're allowed to happen again, are going to happen quickly. And I think for these in-state guys to be there, even more so than we talked about in 2021 and 2020, when we talked about the guys having to know how to recruit when the players from out of state come on campus, it's going to be even more important in 2022 because the push for these guys from every school that they go to is going to be so massive. So I think that for Jair Brown to learn how to recruit right now, so when the visits do happen, he's in Columbus with some of these out-of-state guys, I think that's huge.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing for any of these kids, and peer-to-peer recruiting has become so important, but it's really all about how much you love the school that you're committed to. And honestly, and he's not an Ohio State commitment yet, but Keon Grays is a really vocal about talking to other kids about Ohio State, and you can tell that he's very excited about his upcoming visit. And again, we'll talk more about that later in this week, but I think that there is a difference here, and how you approach other kids is about how much you love the school that you're committed to and the program you're committed to. And for whatever reason, Jair just hasn't felt entirely comfortable doing that yet. Maybe it's the back and forth between Ohio and Louisiana, where he's grew up and where he was raised, where he was born, where he grew up, where he's living now. Who knows? Maybe it's just not his personality. He's an extremely friendly, like affable kid. And I know that people like him when they get to meet him. So I'm sure that his role in the Ohio State class could become very important over these next few months, because he's one of the earliest commits in this class, and you have questions about him. But what you really need for Ohio State right now is to lock in the cornerback position for 2022. They are going to be looking to add a third. He knows that. But Spencer, over the last 4 days, like that third guy, that list seemed to narrow quite a bit.
Yeah, and two absolutely massive fish in this pond. I know we like to say, get the big fish, so I'm going to use that analogy again. Denver Harris, Will Johnson, it looks like Ohio State's on the outside looking in there for both of those guys. And so this cornerback search just adds another layer. You get Jair Brown in the class, you feel good about it. You get Jaheim Singletary in the class, you feel really good about where the position's heading. You're in a great position for Will Johnson. You seem to be comfortable with Denver Harris. And then all of a sudden, you have questions about Jair Brown's commitment. Will Johnson pumps the brakes and now looks to be going to Michigan. Denver Harris keeps Ohio State out of his top 4. Like, the layers of this cornerback recruiting cycle, I think, are just beginning, maybe.
Yeah, and I think that the truth is that people need to understand that is a good thing for Ohio State. And I know that it sounds crazy, but Will Johnson was going to commit to Ohio State at the end of January. He was going to commit to Ohio State on January 31st, decided to back off of that and allow himself to get to know the new coaching staff at Michigan. Maybe a little bit of pushing from the family side and peer pressure from people around his home saying, hey, you can go anywhere but there. And now he's going to make a decision next weekend. It's going to be between Michigan and USC. Ohio State is not involved. Denver Harris, as you alluded to, the 5-star cornerback from North Shore High School in Houston, had released a top 4 on Sunday, did not include Ohio State. That seems like a surprise. And I mean, if I hadn't had conversations with people last Wednesday night that I had conversations with, then I would have been surprised as well. But I was told then Ohio State was moving in a different direction. And so it wasn't a surprise to see them off the list on Sunday. What was a surprise is just the urgency with which these kids feel the need to keep putting out these lists. Because I don't know why anyone needs to hurry right now, especially if you're a 5-star prospect in the class of 2022. Take your time. Like, these schools are going to have a spot for you. It's not the same as a 3-star kid who's trying to lock in a spot at a top school. These kids can wait until next February if they want to. And I'm a little puzzled, Spencer, by this need. And I don't know if it's a need for attention or if if they're just being misguided or misdirected by people close to them. Because if you are in that upper crust of player and you're one of these top 50, top 100 players in the country, none of these schools, A, are going to tell you 6 months from now they don't have a spot for you. And B, none of them really want you to commit right now, because they do want to see players play. They want to see these kids play in person. They want to evaluate them. And so these recruitments and these commitments are going to take on a little bit of a tenuous feeling and a little bit of shaky ground, because things are going to change a lot in these next 6-7 months. And I feel like kids are maybe just jumping because they feel like they're supposed to, but I don't think they need to.
Berm, I have a question.
Oh,
how many official visits are high school seniors allowed to take to colleges?
5.
5. To how many different schools?
5.
So May 31st, they're going to all be allowed 5 official visits. What is the point in having a top 4 when you could just take, even if you don't even want to go to a 5th school, that's a 5th weekend where you just get it paid for you to go somewhere else.
Yeah, and so I guess that's the thing. They still do that. So that's my question is, what's the point of these top 4s again, I appreciate the theater of this, and I mean, it's my whole life, so I get it. I certainly don't want to sit and seem like I'm confused by it that much, but it seems to me that right now, especially for the class of 2022, it's not necessary. There is plenty of time for these top-ranked players who, if they haven't learned by now, hold all the cards in these recruiting battles. They are the ones in charge. There's no real reason to keep feeling like, oh, we got to push this, we got to move this up, because it doesn't do anybody any good. Both sides are better served waiting.
Well, when you're Will Johnson and you're an in-state in Michigan, your dad went to Michigan, you're friends with former Michigan players, and you get a new NFL coach to come coach you at defensive back. If you want to commit to Michigan, by all means, commit to Michigan. That's fine. Like that commitment makes more sense than listing a top four when you have 5 spots available to take official visits. And plus, these guys, when they're juniors, they're at a spring practice or they're somewhere, where they can get eyes on the program and see a practice. That never happened as juniors. So they can't, the trimming of the lists is all based on Zoom and phone calls and hearsay. And it's not based on seeing the programs interact, seeing how players interact in the building, things like that, the nuances of the programs. These guys just aren't getting that. And maybe that's making them speed everything up because they feel more pressure. I don't know. And I do feel bad for them. I'm not trying to berate the players or chastise the players for anything they're doing. It's just really interesting how a lot of these guys are handling this situation. And we look at it from a certain lens and say it doesn't make much sense, but maybe they do have reasons for this.
Well, the reasons are no publicity is bad publicity. Number one, these schools are paying attention. They know that the ebbs and tides of the recruiting world, and how if Denver Harris lists the top 4, I don't even know who's in it: LSU, Texas, Alabama,
Texas A&M,
Texas A&M. Like, who cares? I mean, number one, but number two, it's certainly interesting if you're like Florida or something and you want to get involved in the Denver Harris sweepstakes. At least now you know exactly where he's thinking and feeling and how you have to attack those things. But it's just, again, for me in this cycle specifically, there is just no reason to keep pushing these things up. These kids should be, in my mind, slowing things down, especially, again, like I said, that top 100. These young men and their families need to understand that they're in the position of power, and there is nothing that they gain by consistently giving away their power, I guess. And Will Johnson, to put a check mark on that topic, as I wrote about last week, like, he should have committed to Michigan 6 months ago. If Michigan weren't such a tumult, what's the word I'm looking for? If they weren't such a raging dumpster fire in the last 6 months, he would have committed to Michigan then. That is a player who should be going to Michigan. And the fact that he was this close to committing to Ohio State is a pretty big indictment on the University of Michigan's football program. But kudos to Jim Harbaugh. They were able to dial it back in and figure out a way to re-convince Will Johnson and ultimately his family that they were going to get things righted. But as we talked about last summer, Spencer, the offseason is where pretty much everyone's a national champion contender. So who knows what changes 8 months from now? If Michigan is 7-4 next year, Jim Harbaugh is not going to be their coach after next year. So all this stuff's going to change anyway. Maybe Will Johnson ends up at USC then. But the defensive back recruiting is going to be fascinating to watch. And the big thing for Ohio State is that they want time. They want time to be able to see these kids in person. Kids like Austin Jordan down in Denton Ryan in Texas, listing Ohio State or telling people that Ohio State might be his favorite. Buckeyes really like him, but are they ready to say, hey, absolutely, let's go, dude? You're one of our guys. They're not. And that's just the case for a lot of kids right now around the country. Kamari Ramsey, the safety out in California, is in a similar position. There are some guys like Xavier Nwampa and Zion Branch and Jaheim Singletary and Toriano Pride, the cornerback out of St. Louis, who are all very much like, okay, if these guys want in, absolutely, you never say no. But pretty much everyone else is in a position right now where Ohio State's going, please slow down. please allow us a chance to evaluate you in person, because I don't want to lose relationships or to have kids feel like they're not getting a fair shake and then end up, getting butthurt and walking away and saying, screw Ohio State. But they're also not in a position where they're going to say yes to kids that they don't believe or they don't have 100% confidence are able to be contributors.
Yeah, and I think it all makes sense, right? I think the players have the power, but the coaches and the programs also say, hey, when you come on your official visit, the language I would be using is, let's wait until you come on your official visit. You're basically inviting them for the official visit. Wait until you come on this official visit. We'll chat, and then you can commit in my office, or you can commit, to our player personnel director. You can commit when your parents are there too. Like, those are the languages that coaches are going to probably start using to slow these guys down and just say, hey, let's pump the brakes. When you get here, you can commit.
Yeah, if we ever get a chance to get back there again with visits happening. I mean, again, we've talked about it ad nauseum here. There is no reason that the dead period should be continued through May 31st. It is what it is. That's what's happening. Now, every one of these kids around the country and Ohio State are hoping that there is going to be an opportunity for some sort of in-person evaluation, camps, whatever. There's not a lot of optimism that that's going to happen. And so I don't know how this cycle really gets any different or better for these kids. Maybe they get to take official visits in the fall, but for the schools themselves, they're still not going to be able to evaluate these kids up close and personal until maybe next fall. And so you might see a lot of schools in the Ohio State's position try to slow things down. What you will see is schools that are not in Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, et cetera. Those schools might try to hurry things up. So that's just kind of the way it goes. Spencer, is there anything else in the defensive backfield that we want to talk about?
Seems like a lot of DBs are putting Texas in that list, and it just makes me wonder what's going to happen this fall when Oklahoma's scoring 55 on Texas. I think that's an interesting paradigm that's going on right now. Everybody's got Texas in their top 5, a lot of momentum there. Feels a lot of different shade of orange from last summer to me, but we'll see.
Yeah, listen, Texas has more talent than any place in the country. Anytime a new staff, and this is something I actually said, if you remember when we were talking about Will Johnson last November, I thought that the best chance for Michigan to keep him at that point would have been for a new coaching staff to come in, because I thought it would re-energize the program. Jim Harbaugh was able to do that without him being on the outs, which, again, as I said, kudos to him. They figured out a good recipe, their new staff. Even Xavier Nwampa, just as an anecdote, when we were in Arizona, mentioned that the Michigan staff now is much different and much more energetic and a better recruiting staff than the previous one. And Xavier, one of the few spots he's visited was Michigan. So he actually was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I don't think that that's going to really move the dial for them yet, but there's a possibility if things stretch out into November that could come back around for them. But sometimes you just love that new staff energy, and that's what's happening in Texas. You see kids getting a surge of like, oh, I want to stay home and be a part of the answer. But again, as you mentioned, if they go out in the first 2 or 3 games of the season and get their doors blown off by Oklahoma again or whatever, then things change quickly. So when you go from the we're all fresh and new and exciting to, oh, wow, this is the same old in a blink of an eye. So anyway, that's it for me, Spencer. Anything else?
Nope, I'm good.
All right. Thanks for listening, folks. Thanks for watching. This has been Talking Stuff, the Ohio State Recruiting Podcast, brought to you by Lettermen Row and Buyers Automotive. Have a great day. We'll be back in a few days with more.